There's a moment all of us experience at some point, a day when you look around your life and quietly realize something no longer fits. Everything is fine on the surface. Nothing's falling apart. Yet inside, there's an emptiness, a soft, persistent call that seems to whisper your name. It's not the sound of failure, but the echo of your own soul saying, "We've been here too long." That moment isn't loud or dramatic, but it's powerful enough to make you pause. It's as if the universe gently tapped your shoulder to remind you there's something within you still waiting to be lived, something you once knew but forgot. That faint unease is the true beginning of transformation. Not the crash of crisis, not the flash of enlightenment, but that quiet recognition that you no longer belong where you've always been. And even when you don't yet know where you're going, part of you starts to move. A small part, silent, slow, but real. The part that knows you don't need a reason to change, only enough honesty to admit, I can't keep living like this. There comes a point in life when you realize you've been living inside a loop, one that formed so gradually you never noticed when it began. Day after day, you do the same things, think in the same patterns, react the same way, and call it me. But most of that me is just a collection of beliefs and habits built from the past. You believe in the limits others once placed on you. You believe in old failures and quietly tell yourself, this is just who I am. Somewhere in your mind, a part of you still longs to change. But deeper down, another voice whispers, don't bother, it's not for you. That voice isn't cruel, it's tired. It's the voice of someone who once tried and was disappointed. And that's exactly where transformation begins. Not when you force yourself to be different, but when you finally stop and start to see. Just see. See how you think, how you react, how you shrink yourself. That awareness, so simple, so subtle, is the first act of breaking free. Because once you truly see, you can't unsee. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When you begin to notice your patterns, you gain the power to choose differently. But choosing differently is never easy. The brain is designed to protect stability, not welcome change. Every time you try to do something new, it resists, with hesitation, fear, and doubt, all to pull you back to safety. It's not laziness, it's survival. The mind says, let's stick with what we know, at least it's predictable. And so you repeat the same cycles, not because you don't want change, but because you don't yet believe you can. The truth is, change doesn't begin with action. It begins with the image you hold of yourself. If you still see yourself as someone who always fails, every effort will bend itself to fit that belief. You can focus, push, and strive, but everything will snap back to the old pattern. Because deep down, you never believed otherwise. Only when you redefine who you are can your actions truly hold. Change isn't becoming a new person. It's seeing the world through a new mirror. Then comes the tension between the self that wants comfort and the self that wants to grow. It's the collision of two identities, the old self clinging to safety and the new self reaching for expansion. You'll feel lost, uncertain, maybe even afraid. But that isn't failure. It's proof that transformation is happening. Every rebirth, whether of the spirit or the self, must pass through darkness first. You may not notice it, but each moment you stop and ask, why did I react that way? What am I really afraid of? Could I choose differently? That's your brain rewiring itself. Every question builds a new pathway. Every small act of awareness is a thread weaving new connections across your consciousness. You are rewriting yourself, little by little. Yet most of us want to change without discomfort, to reach freedom without friction. We want the result, but not the unraveling. But growth always comes with chaos. When the old mind loses control, it fights back with self-doubt, The ego tries to restore balance, even if that balance is suffocating. And that's when the bravest part of you must whisper, "It's okay, keep going." Because in disorder, a new order is being born. Transformation doesn't happen in radiant light, but in the quiet darkness of nights when you question everything. It doesn't arrive in grand moments, but in countless small ones, when you choose to look instead of avoid, to act as the person you're still becoming, even if you're not there yet. And that is where real transformation begins. Every true transformation begins the moment you dare to face the root. You start to realize that what's been holding you back isn't the world around you, but the emotional patterns you once created to survive. As a child, you learned to stay quiet to be loved, to smile to stay safe, and to hide your true feelings so no one would be disappointed in you. Those temporary survival strategies, repeated year after year, eventually became a thick layer of armor protecting you from pain. But one day, you realize that the same armor keeping you safe has also kept you from truly feeling alive. Change, at its essence, isn't about fixing yourself. It's about gently, slowly, and honestly removing those old layers. Because no one is ever truly broken. We've simply been living through ways that once helped us survive, but no longer serve who we're becoming. When you find the courage to face your fears, not to judge them, but to listen to them, you begin to understand that every reaction has a reason. And that understanding alone is already a form of healing. If the mind were a garden, every thought would be a small path. Each time you revisit the same emotion, the path deepens. But when you pause, observe, and choose differently, a new path begins to form. At first, it feels uncertain, overgrown, and awkward to walk through, but as you continue, it becomes familiar. The brain transforms in the same way. You don't have to fight the old paths, only walk the new ones more often. With each step, you are quietly rewriting yourself, not through pressure, but through awareness. What we fear most is not change itself, but the space between who we were and who we are becoming. That fragile in-between where the old hasn't fully faded and the new hasn't yet arrived. In that space, we feel lost, uncertain, sometimes afraid, but that isn't loss, it's expansion. When the old world collapses, it isn't because you've failed, but because you're being called to grow into a new level of consciousness. And in this stage, instead of clinging to the image of who you once were, you must learn to trust the unknown, to believe that everything is quietly rearranging itself, even if you can't yet see the full picture. Each time you choose to breathe instead of react, to understand instead of judge, to be patient instead of control, your brain learns, I am safe when I let go. And from that safety, transformation begins to unfold. Change has never truly been a fight. It is more like returning home after a long journey. Walking slowly through each room, brushing off the dust, putting things back in place, and realizing that everything you've been searching for was never lost to begin with. When we begin to see more clearly what's happening inside us, life seems to test us through familiar patterns, old situations, old faces, old emotions we thought we'd outgrown. They return one by one as if to ask, how will you respond this time? It's not punishment, but the universe's way of asking whether we've truly changed. Every emotional loop appears only to measure the depth of our awareness. We might find ourselves slipping back into old stories, revisiting relationships that once hurt us, or facing fears we thought we'd already healed. But if we look closely, something subtle has shifted. This time, we no longer react out of instinct. This time, we don't need to prove anything, don't need to win, don't fear being left behind. We start to choose calm, to choose silence, or simply to walk away. And that small shift, that choice, is the first sign that we're finally stepping out of the loop. The hardest part of this phase isn't action, it's belief, because the mind will always try to pull us back toward what's familiar, toward the places that once felt safe. It whispers, "At least here we know what will happen." And with just one unguarded moment, we fall back into old patterns, loving the same way, fearing the same fears, worrying the same worries. But every time we recognize we're repeating, we wake up a little more. That awareness, however fragile, is the seed of freedom. Psychologists call this the emotional feedback loop, the process by which life keeps offering us chances to respond differently. Each time we choose a new reaction, the old neural pathway weakens and the new one grows stronger. Gradually, the brain stops associating fear with experience and begins to associate peace with awareness. This is the most delicate form of inner retraining, learning how to feel without resistance. But the loop doesn't end in one try. Life will bring us back to similar situations, each time slightly different, so we can see more clearly, understand more deeply. Each return isn't a failure, it's another layer of growth. Every time we respond differently, another layer of the soul's old skin is shed. And one day, we realize we no longer need to get over anything, because there's nothing left to overcome once we've learned how to stay with the feeling, to stay with the fear, to stay with ourselves. And in that staying, the pain begins to dissolve. It doesn't disappear. It simply loses its power, because we've learned that not every emotion needs to be conquered. Some just need to be understood. By then, the old loops lose their pull. We no longer need to prove, to fix, to change anyone. Everything around us looks the same, yet how we see it has changed. And that alone is enough to change the world. There will come a day when you no longer feel like you're trying to change. All your efforts will begin to dissolve into something lighter, quieter, as if you've finally aligned with something that was always within you. There's no grand awakening, no signal from the universe, just an ordinary morning when you look at yourself and realize you've started to respond differently. The things that once made you angry now only make you smile. The things that once frightened you now only make you exhale and move on. Not because you've grown cold, but because you've become free. Transformation doesn't happen in noise. It happens in silence. It doesn't need to be declared, nor does it need recognition. You know you've changed not when others say so, but when your heart stops resisting. In that stillness, everything inside you begins to soften. You no longer need to prove yourself, to argue, to be understood. You begin choosing peace over being right, listening over reacting, moving forward instead of staying where your soul no longer fits. That's the quiet rebirth of a soul that has finally come home to itself. And then you understand all that you once called pain was never punishment, but expansion. No storm is meaningless. It arrives to clear space for the light. No wound is wasted. It exists to make you look deeper within. Every loss, every ache, every letting go is part of the journey back to yourself. In that realization, you see that change was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who you've always been. The truest version of you never disappeared. It was only buried under fear, expectations, and the roles you learned to play to be loved. Now, those layers begin to fall away, piece by piece, and beneath them, you rediscover your original essence, quiet, clear, and sincere. The deeper you go, the lighter you feel. Not because life gets easier, but because you've stopped fighting yourself. You no longer try to chase away the dark, because you've realized that light never needs to fight the darkness. It only needs to shine. And when you allow yourself to simply be, everything around you begins to shift. Relationships grow more genuine, dreams become clearer, and life, for the first time in years, starts to feel real again. That is the essence of transformation. Not changing who you are, but returning to who you've always been, where you don't have to strive, prove, or earn your worth. You simply exist. And in that state, life ceases to be something you must endure and becomes something you are finally free to experience. When we've moved beyond the tangled layers of the self, what remains isn't the roar of victory, but a stillness so deep it feels almost unfamiliar. In that silence, we begin to realize that what we need is not to become stronger, but gentler. Gentler with our old wounds, with our past mistakes, with the fragile parts of ourselves we once rejected. We no longer want to heal as if it were a task to complete. We simply want to live whole, naturally, slowly, without force. Healing begins when we stop trying to fix ourselves, when we stop seeing emotions as problems and start recognizing them as messages, when we stop rushing to forget pain and instead dare to stay long enough to understand why it's there. A person who has feared the dark will always understand the beauty of light more deeply than anyone else. In the same way, those who have been hurt the most are often those who can love the deepest, because they've learned that love is not an ideal, but the courage to keep their heart open, even knowing it might break again. In this journey, kindness toward oneself is the most powerful medicine. Each time we forgive ourselves, we rewrite the language of love within. Each time we choose to rest instead of forcing ourselves to push on, we teach the mind that peace, too, is an achievement. Every small gesture, every gentle word, becomes a mirror reflecting the quiet work of healing taking place inside. There will still be days when we feel lost, days when everything seems to start over, but this time we're no longer afraid. We know that nothing is ever truly lost. Everything is simply being retaught in another form. Yesterday's pain becomes today's understanding. Today's loneliness becomes the space where we meet ourselves again. Healing is not a destination, but a rhythm, a cycle of walking, pausing, breathing, and moving again. We may still feel sadness, but now it's clearer. We may still feel lonely, but now the loneliness is warm, because now we've become someone who can sit quietly in their own silence without fear. And in that quiet, something miraculous happens. We no longer need anyone to save us because we've learned how to take our own hand. That is the true beauty of healing, realizing that not all light must be bright, and not all darkness must be feared. Some lights exist only to guide one quiet traveler. Some darkness exists only to remind us that we are still breathing. And so we keep living, keep learning to love, and keep opening, not to be perfect, but simply to be real. In the end, we come to see that transformation was never a destination, but the way we move through each day in awareness. It isn't one blinding moment of awakening, but thousands of quiet moments when we choose to stay with ourselves instead of running away. No one ever really knows when they've become whole, because humans were never made to be perfect. We were made to keep evolving. Every thought, every decision, every deep breath is part of that process. We no longer need a grand reason to live differently. Sometimes it's enough to wake up one morning and feel a quiet desire to be a little softer, a little more honest, a little more present. Because transformation doesn't come from grand plans. It's born from small, repeated choices that silently shape the soul. The farther we go, the more we realize that becoming a new person was never the goal. The goal was to return to ourselves, to the gentle rhythm we once forgot. We may still stumble, still make mistakes, still lose our way, but the difference now is that we know we can rise without hiding. We can cry without shame. We can be fragile and still carry dignity. We begin to understand that not having all the answers is perfectly fine, because it's in the not knowing that space is made for new things to be born. And then, in a small, fleeting moment, maybe when the morning light filters through the curtain, or when an old song softly plays, we realize we're no longer trying to become. We're simply being, a human being, breathing, living, learning to embrace both light and shadow. And perhaps that's the true meaning of evolution, not escaping what once hurt us, but seeing the beauty in it and smiling. In the end, we understand there is no final point. Every ending is only the beginning of a new awareness. Every closure is another rebirth, because this journey, the journey of returning to oneself, is the only one that never truly ends. You don't need to force yourself to become someone else. You don't need to go far to find what you've always carried. Everything you seek, every peace you've been waiting for, has always been here, in every breath, in every moment you dare to be fully present. You don't need a brilliant light to know you're alive, just the warmth of a small one flickering inside your heart. And when you look back, you'll realize transformation was never something happening to you. It has always been something unfolding within you.